Hello and welcome to Cleveland Connections, an online series from the Cleveland Council on World Affairs where we discuss new developments and breaking news in U.S. foreign policy with subject matter experts and thought leaders, all of whom have a connection to Cleveland. Today we're talking about the recent signing of a peace agreement between Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of Congo. Our guest is Chris Ringenbach, Managing Director for Geopolitical Risk at Redpoint Advisors in Washington, D.C. Chris is a former CIA, State Department, and White House official, and until recently, he was part of the team that negotiated last week's groundbreaking deal between Rwanda and the DRC. He's also a Cleveland native and St. Ignatius grad. Chris, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
So, first of all, tell us about your background growing up in Ohio and how you ended up in DC.
Well, I was born actually in East Cleveland, but my parents moved to Lakewood when I was 4. I went to Lakewood Public Schools all the way through 8th grade and then St. Ignatius afterwards. I did leave afterwards. I went to University of Vermont for school and then ended up working at CIA, as you said, starting in 2006. But my family's still back in Cleveland and I'm there probably a few times a quarter. So it's really great to be part of the Cleveland connection again.
Well, we're excited to have you. So, let's start with some background. Tell us about the conflict in Eastern DRC and put the agreement last week in a little bit of historical context.
So the conflict in DRC and Rwanda is important for a lot of different reasons. First, the populations that are affected, the centrality of DRC and Rwanda to the rest of Africa, and also the economic potential of the region. So just by the numbers real quick, so the size of the DRC is that of United States from eastern Mississippi to the East Coast. Rwanda on the other side is only one quarter the size of Ohio. So you can kind of get a little bit of a David versus Goliath kind of idea here. Population wise, total population between the two countries, 10 times that of Ohio, but the GDP is only 1/10 of Ohio. So a lot of room for economic development and potential there. There's been conflict in this region since the Rwanda genocide in 1994. Not including the deaths in the genocide, we've seen about 6 million people killed through the various conflicts in the last 30 years, plus millions more displaced. And the stability of the DRC and Rwanda is integral to the rest of Africa. In the past conflicts, in the first two Congo wars, plus the conflict now, we've seen more than 6 million dead that has spanned in 9, 10 countries. So it really brings in the region. So stability here is important for stability in Africa writ large.
Yeah. So, what are the drivers of this conflict? What leads the countries in this region to continue to go back to war?
That's a great question. I would see kind of three major kind of buckets here. First is obviously there's a lot of ethnic tension here, and that's what a lot of countries point to. During the Rwanda genocide in 1994, you had a battle between the Tutsis and Hutus. That kind of carried over into DRC. That kind of started the conflict. And we're still seeing some remnants of that today. There's an armed group called the FDLR, which is a majority Hutu group that does have a stated intent to go against Rwanda. Rwanda often points to that FDLR presence as one of the reasons for its actions inside of Eastern DRC. But it's a very diverse region with a lot of different ethnic groups and a lack of stability for more than 30 years. So that ethnic tension does kind of build into it. But there's also a big economic driver. So the region is absolutely has a lot of economic potential from mineral wealth, agricultural wealth. Those are all kind of being fought over who controls that. So you have at the local level. Control over those resources at the local level helps people kind of gain jobs and independence. If you have 30 years of war, that means you have a lot of war economies set up. So, military leaders in the world, in the region, militia leaders, they all benefit from seeing this conflict continue. So those are some economic drivers. But the economic potential for peace is absolutely massive because all this region, the lack of development here means that there's a lot of potential to go from informal economies to formal economies, illicit trade to licit trade, which has a lot of economic benefits. The last part, though, of one of the drivers is personalities, right? So President Kagame of Rwanda, he's been in power since for close to 30 years now. He's seen this conflict going on. He has a lot of personal history at stake here. We also have the Kabila family. As I said, Rwanda initially backed Laurent Kabila in 1996, 1997. He came to power. Sorry for that loud noise. He ended up passing away in 2001 from assassination, where his son came in, Joseph Kabila, who ruled the country until 2019. Kabila is now actually back in the East and working with Rwanda and others to potentially reassert control in DRC. So there's a lot of history from a personal perspective that still drives this conflict as well.
Okay, so let's fast forward to the 2020s and tell us about how the US got involved in trying to mediate this conflict.
That's perfect. So in 2022, as I said, we started seeing the detente that was established when President Tshisekedi of Congo came to power in 2019. In 2019, he worked with President Kagame, President Museveni of Uganda to have an agreement where everyone has zones of security in the East and we have relative stability. That started to fall apart for a number of reasons, but in 2022, we really saw that conflict step up when this armed group M23 moved from the north in Uganda and Ituri down into the Kivus with Rwanda backing. So that armed group came in, started to push for additional control in North Kivu. In response to that, we saw the DRC start to work with local populations, freedom fighters as they call them, but they're called Wazalendo in local lingo. So they started to arm up and fight against M23. So we had these two different armed groups fighting, both backed by different states starting to come together. That was 2022. In 2023, we saw Burundi starting to get pulled into the conflict. As we said, we have Uganda in there, Rwanda in there. Kenya also put down the East Africa Regional Force, which came down to try to stabilize the region. So we had a lot of different countries operating in this area, which made us very nervous for a potential new Congo War III that involved a lot of states in Africa. We also were then approaching the election period in the DRC, which was in December 2023. That was a very kind of important period because it'd be the first time that we're seeing a presidential election since Tshisekedi was elected in 2018 and a very unstable time in the DRC. So that's what motivated the Biden administration to say, let's think about a way to de-escalate the situation, get this through the DRC election, and then talk about a way forward post-election period. So in November 2023, Director Haynes, former Director of National Intelligence, she did some shuttle diplomacy between Rwanda and DRC to establish what she called a set of confidence building measures. These measures were focused on de-escalating the situation, opening lines of communication between the two countries, and getting us through the DRC election period. That was successful. We had open conversations from November through December of 2023. We had a relatively peaceful election period in the DRC. And then in 2024, post inauguration of Tshisekedi, it allowed us to get into a more serious negotiating position.
Chris, tell us about your role in these negotiations and how you got involved in them.
Uh, my history is in intelligence, right? So I started as a chemical weapons analyst at CIA and soon fell in love with Africa early in my career. So I've had a long history of watching Africa. Before I was in my ultimate job at ODNI, I was the National Intelligence Officer for Africa. So in that role, my job was to be the lead analyst for the US intelligence community on Africa. We had a lot of different conflicts in there. I got to know Director Haynes very well during that time. Unfortunately, because there's about 10 coups that happened in Africa during that period. So there's a lot of policy meetings. So when we started this process of negotiations, had the honor of traveling with her, along with the senior director for Africa at the White House and the assistant secretary for Africa at the State Department. So we went and did that shuttle diplomacy with Director Haynes and set up those confidence building measures. We took an intelligence-based approach. So we want to make this quiet because there's a lot of lack of trust between those two sides. So we want to have those quiet conversations where both sides could be very open. We could share information in a private forum and start getting those conversations moving. So my role in that setting was to facilitate those conversations between the two sides, make sure that those confidence building measures were being executed, and then helping set those conversations between Director Haynes and the leaders of the two countries moving forward.
And you then transitioned to the State Department, where it sounds like the negotiations also transitioned during the Trump administration. So, how did we get to the point where we had this signing ceremony in DC last week?
So in 2024, still under the Biden administration, we focused on moving from that near-term goal of getting through the DRC elections into revitalizing two main processes that were African-led. One was called the Luanda process, the other the Nairobi process. The Luanda process was focused on peace between DRC and Rwanda. Nairobi process was focused on peace within the Congo with the various armed groups. So those processes had been going on for years prior to our involvement. They were pretty stagnant because the conflict was moving forward. So we were saying, how can we actually revitalize those processes? So in 2024, what we did was we focused on engagement with those two different, the leaders of those two different processes, helping them put the U.S. support behind those and get those back up and moving again. So we actually saw the Luanda process really gain steam in 2024. Kind of culminating in December of 2024 with a meeting between two foreign ministers where they had a tentative peace agreement. However, the two heads of state were not able to get that across the finish line. On the Nairobi process, the inter-Congolese process, we were able to get that process integrated into the Luanda process because it's hard to talk about the peace between the two sides when, outside actors, Rwanda is backing one of the armed groups. We have to integrate all these different processes together. We got to a few kind of interim peace deals, interim cessation of hostilities during 2024, but we were not able to get it across the finish line and get that full kind of peace agreement in 24. So in 2025, following the election of President Trump, I had the honor of moving over to State Department and continuing to work on this account until about October of this year. President Trump nominated Masad Boulos as special envoy for Africa and other portfolios. So he took the lead of doing negotiations between the two sides in around the March timeframe. What really kind of separated this year from last year is a more development of the economic potential incentives moving forward. So during the Biden administration, we set up what we call the peace dividend growth corridor, which is a thought process about how do we actually bring some economic incentives to actually stability and peace in the region. It's pretty nebulous. We had some big frameworks put together, but we didn't have kind of the legs behind that. So this year, say some colleagues at State Department took the lead of developing what was called the Regional Economic Integration Framework. That REEF, as we call it, was a very comprehensive economic agreement between DRC and Rwanda that talks about the economic integration of the entire region. It has five main pillars, one on energy, one on infrastructure, one on mineral supply chains, one on national parks and management, and a broader one that talks about water, agribusiness, education, etc. That REEF agreement, which was signed last week, helps show that there's real tangible benefits for peace.
So you mentioned critical minerals and supply chains, the magic words. DRC obviously is famously rich in mineral wealth. There's been a ton of attention in DC around critical minerals. Arguably, that's why the Trump administration is so interested in the DRC and in resolving this conflict. So, how does stabilizing the situation in Eastern DRC help global critical mineral supply chains?
There's like first order and second order kind of pieces of this one, right? So if you're looking over at the Kivus, this very mineral rich area, a lot of coltan, a lot of tin, and gold. Obviously, gold's not a critical mineral, but obviously is a very mineral that is critical to a lot of different processes. So there's that near term kind of thing. How do we actually stabilize that region, develop it, and allow it to actually get into the global markets? So that process, I think there's two areas that I like to talk about when we're talking about this area because it really helps show how the economic progress really can help bring peace about. So there's this area called Rubaya. Rubaya is one of the biggest coltan producing regions of the Congo and also of Africa. It is historically kind of artisanal mining, but has, a lot of potential to be one of the largest coltan producing areas globally. So that has been a center of conflict. It's not too far from this town of Goma, which is I should say, a city. It's millions of people right on the Rwanda DRC border, kind of the hub of the capital, North Kivu. So there's a potential where we're able to stabilize Rubaya and build a conflict-free critical mineral chain from Rubaya through Goma into the DRC, which links those two countries together. Basically, DRC will get a lot of obviously all the proceeds of the mineral mining side. The population will get jobs, especially with artisanal mining kind of pressure relief valve there. You would have stability being built in a key corridor in Eastern DRC. Then Rwanda has the ability to then get offtake and do some processing of those minerals to then sell to United States, the West, and other markets. That economic potential is worth, billions of dollars. And it's one of the key conflict areas. So if we see the development of there, which would benefit both countries, we also see then the piece that is associated with that. It's only going to happen if there's peace. That's the key part there. Because if there's not stability, those aren't conflict-free minerals, and therefore they're not going to be a lot. The big companies who want those are not going to be buying, the equivalent of blood diamonds of conflict minerals. So that has to be stable. The second kind of corridor is there's a dam called the Ruzizi 3 Dam. It's on the Burundi-Rwanda DRC border. Um, in order to do all this development of the mining sector, you also need power. This is a shovel-ready dam that has backing by the Development Finance Corporation, the United States, IMF, World Bank. All those different organizations are ready to actually see that dam developed. That is along another kind of big conflict corridor. So if we see that economic development through there, we'll see these critical minerals come online. It'll benefit the United States because it provides an alternative to other sources such as China for these minerals, and it also stabilizes this region. So it's a huge win across the board. That's the kind of the first tier. But then the second tier is if you have stability in the Eastern Congo, you have broader stability in Congo. It allows for easier US investment. You have 70% of all the cobalt globally in the DRC. So that provides an opening for us to have better conversations with the DRC to get US and Western firms invested there. There's also some really promising lithium deposits in Southeast DRC that could really help provide some of the lithium needed for the batteries and other kind of infrastructure that we use on a day-to-day basis. So critical minerals obviously are critical to the United States and the economy and stability and military protection of the United States, but it also provides us a really great hook to drive peace in the region as well.
So as you said, huge economic upside, huge potential. But as you and I both know, from these kinds of negotiations, the signing of the agreement is really just the beginning of the process, not the end, right? You've got to get over that hurdle of signing the agreement, but then the rubber meets the road in implementation. So what's it going to take, especially from the U.S. side, to make these agreements stick and to make sure all sides implement the provisions and keep the peace? And do we have the tools and resources right now as the US government to be able to support that?
This is just the beginning of the story. So when the Congo War II ended in 2003, the peace agreement was actually signed in 2002, but not actually fully implemented in 2003. We're expecting to see the same type of thing here. So these agreements, we have the peace agreement, we have the regional economic integration framework. Now we have to start talking about implementation of those. What's really nice on the peace agreement side is we have two mechanisms that help us drive it forward. The Joint Oversight Committee, which is a high-level dispute resolution process, and then the Joint Security Mechanism. And this is going to be kind of weedy here, but what it does is it helps kind of drive efforts against that armed group that I talked about earlier, the FDLR, and then Rwanda lifting its defensive measures or withdrawing from the DRC. Those two processes are what we have in place to actually drive progress on the ground. Those have been used since June already. We've seen some progress along those lines, but we need to see those processes continue moving forward. Broadly speaking, peace agreements, 40% of them fail. right? And if you're a betting person, this is a 30-year conflict. I'd probably bet against the success of this conflict, not because of, it's this administration or any other kind of things you're seeing from the political side, but as we talked about at the very beginning, it's a very complex environment from a political side, from an economic side, from an ethnic side. So we have a lot of things stacked against us. But I firmly believe that this is probably the best chance we have to see stability in the DRC. Three kind of things I see going forward that we need. First is accountability. It's accountability for the two parties, accountability for the DRC to follow through on its obligations inside laid out in the conflict, laid out in the agreement, especially against FDLR. Accountability for Rwanda, that they stop supporting the armed group M23, that they withdraw their thousands of troops from the DRC border, and that they move towards illicit mineral chain and illicit development of economies along the border. And then there's also accountability for the other countries in the region. As I said, this region is really has a history of other countries becoming involved. We have to see all those countries be focused on implementing this agreement and not trying to back one side or the other. And then it's also accountability to the United States. As you said, it's going to take a lot of work, and there's a lot of competing priorities out there. Holding the United States government accountable for continuing pushing this forward is going to be absolutely critical. The second part is creativity. One of the reasons we haven't seen this conflict end in 30 years is because it's very hard, as I talked about. One of the biggest challenges we're going to have is governance models for Eastern DRC, and we're going to need some creative solutions that allows the populations to feel represented in an area that they have never had representation before. We also need creativity and demobilization, creativity and economic development. There's a lot of opportunities for some really great thinking here to help drive this forward. The last part I would say is optimism. If you read any article about this conflict or about the peace agreement, it's going to say it's not going to work. Like I said, if I'm betting, I'd probably take that. But as Colin Powell said back in the day, optimism is a force multiplier. I really believe it. If you don't think there's a pathway, we're never going to get there. So I can tell you in the 2 years I've been doing this, we've hit so many roadblocks. I thought there's no way forward. We kept trying to talk to more people who have experience, get some new ideas, and say there's always a pathway here. And that optimism is the only way we're actually going to get this across the finish line. So it's going to be a journey in the next year or two, but I think there's a lot of opportunity for, creative thinking, optimism, accountability, which will then open up some real potential for investment, not just for broader United States countries, but also I see some real ties to Ohio as well.
That's great. I love the optimism. I'll take it. We can use optimism wherever we can find it right now. So, Chris, any last thoughts about why Clevelanders should be paying attention to this conflict?
Yeah, I think there's some direct ties. Obviously, the rich region from a mineral perspective, it plays into alloys, it plays into paints and other kind of coverings. You also have a lot of opportunity should we get this piece for industrial exports going into the region, which could provide us a great opportunity for some of Ohio's manufacturers to see a pathway to get some international business. So I think that's a great opportunity. But then also, like, I think this is an amazing conflict and, amazing story here where those who have, an interest in this region, I could tell you there's plenty of room for support and help on the implementation side. So I think we see the commercial opportunities to drive this piece forward. I think there's a lot of opportunities for Cleveland businesses and Cleveland individuals to get involved as well.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Chris, for walking us through what we're seeing in the news, helping us understand what's happening. And we're very lucky to have you as a Cleveland alum and a Cleveland connection. Thank you for your service and great to have you here.
Thanks, Marty. And we celebrated, a Cleveland championship for the Cavaliers back when we were at the White House together. Hopefully we get to do that again this year. So
Yes, let's hope maybe this year the Guardians.
Thanks
sounds
so
good.
much,
Talk
Chris.
to you soon.